Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of APRC's Research Aromatica. Today's talk is the state of African natural product sector, challenges and opportunities. We are privileged to have Professor David Katerere with us today. He is the Research Platform Chair of the Pharmaceutical and Biotech Advancement in Africa at Tshwane University of Technology. He's also chair of PharmaConnect Africa, a nonprofit which is a premier convener of the pharmaceutical industry in Africa. He's also a board member at UI Global and the Association of African Medicinal Plant Standards. He holds a PhD in pharmaceutical science from the University of Strathclyde, Scotland. He has worked in pharmaceutical and biotech practice and research for the past 25 years. He's also worked in many countries. He has several inventions to his name. That's fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that, including the nutraceutical Nacello and COVID Connect app for use in clinical trials and post-recovery. He's published over 50 journal articles and is co-editor of 3 books. He is member of the advisory committee of SAHPRA and the Global Health Supply Chain Consortium, co-founded by the faculty at University of Michigan, University of Southern California. As a professor, he teaches and researches across the pharmaceutical and biotech value chain, including product development from medicinal plants for food, nutraceuticals, and medicines, as well as clinical testing, substandardization, and falsified medicines, vaccines, and medicine governance. It's quite a bio. We are very privileged to have you here today, Professor. And so I would love to turn where we are live. We're between the United States and South Africa today. Our technology is holding up, and if we have any glitches, Professor, the audience is very patient, so we will just ride them out. And so, without further ado, we can get your slides up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Janet, and thank you very much to APRC for inviting me. So I'm really excited to be here. And so I'm going to talk about the state of the African natural product sector in 3 parts. So it's a 3-part act, if you like. And so I'll give a little bit of an introduction to what is Africa. Quite cheeky, I guess. And then we will get into the first part will be a short discussion on food and nutraceuticals from Africa. And then second part will be medicine and herbal pharmaceuticals. And then the third part will be the cannabis. How are we going to make money out of the African cannabis industry? And then I will specifically state out what the opportunities and challenges are at the end. Okay, so let's get to it. So most people, and it's unfortunate, think of Africa as a country, but sometimes it is a country. And sometimes it is not a country. But Africa is actually 55 countries. And even as Africans, we tend to talk about it as a country. We are 1.3 billion citizens. So in fact, if we were a country, we would be the second most populous country in the world after China. We speak over 2,000 languages. And therefore, you can see just how diverse our cultures are. And this is very important when it comes to traditional medicine, which is always informed by cultural perspectives. What's also interesting is that we actually have 3 times the number of traditional healers compared to the number of healthcare workers. At the moment, unfortunately, we don't consider traditional healers to be healthcare workers. But if we added our traditional healers to the conventional healthcare workers, we could actually possibly be better able to deliver healthcare in Africa. The other thing that makes Africa unique is the fact that it has all these habitats and microclimates and all over, which are quite unique to the continent and you will not get anywhere else. So this is why the continent is actually biodiverse rich. So out of Africa, what do we get? You'll probably be familiar with the common medicinal plants. So some of these are obviously now naturalized. So things like castor bean, for instance. But then we have our own indigenous ones. So if you look at the millets, pearl millets, the sorghums, which I will talk about later on. We've got argan, from which oil is extracted, and baobab is becoming very big. So actually, Africa has between 40 and 45,000 different species of plants, and very interesting biomes as well, some of them which are unique. And of these, 5,400 at least are used as medicines. And then and some of these are also used as foods. And at the moment, 80 plant species are in formal trade. So you can see that there is still a lot of potential in there to find new plant species for medicinal and medical use, and also for foods and probably industrial use. So what are the factors that are driving this industry then? Well, there's an increased cohort of African scholars and researchers than ever before. And there's a huge interest in this area. Every other week I get communication from students all over Africa who want to come and visit and study natural products. And as you know, it comes all the way from pharmacognosy to phytochemistry, product development. And then there are these global trends like social media. Now through Instagram, you can build national, continental, and global businesses. And there's also particular interest because of the Black Lives Matter movement around ethnic skin cosmetics. And here's a product actually that one of my friends developed. It's called Momi Monto, and I've been involved in some of the work that she's done. She's trained as a somatologist and is able to use marula oil, as you can see here, and shea butter, and also black soap. So these are the things that are really global trends at the moment. Then, of course, there's the alternative and new food movement. Some times we talk about neglected foods, but neglected by whom? And these are foods that have the potential to, in a sense, feed the world, but also become globalized. And we'll talk a little bit about those. Then the other driving factor is entrepreneurship. And I'm involved with an organization called UI Global, where we have what's called Salvation, where we are really looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and what innovations can come out of those. Frugal innovations that will support the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. Then COVID-19, which we cannot ignore. So when people have no alternatives, they will turn, as they have done for millennia, to their environment, and they will craft innovations that will sometimes save their lives. And this is really what we call citizen scientists. And I will give you a quick example of what we are seeing in the use of African medicinal plants. Here's a quick slide on just how much research is going on. And obviously, the more research the plant, then it then comes to the notice of the world. So we've had a lot of interest in the past decade with Hoodia godoni, Cyclopia, Scletium. A lot of these tend to be South African species, some endemic in Southern Africa, but this kind of tells you just how much research is going on in South Africa and in Southern Africa. And then we've got things like Catharanthus roseus, very interesting. I'll show you something a bit later on. And Momodica, Trigonella. These also because of diabetes. the incidence of the diabetes increasing. So let's go then to the first act of the three-part act. Act 1, food and nutraceuticals. And here, sorghum, it's the so-called new superfood. It's been around. It's actually a crop that is indigenous and ancient in Southern Africa and across Africa. Nigeria being probably one of the biggest producers of sorghum. Increasingly, there's a focus on these millets and these grains because they are climate-smart crops. They probably will do better than maize, which maize, as you know, came from Mexico through Italy and then Ethiopia into the mines in South Africa, and then displaced the local indigenous crops. But definitely these are coming back. It's high in protein and micronutrients, as you can see from here. So here's a comparison of the commonly consumed grains, and you can see here maize, which I think in the US you call corn. But look at sorghum, pearl millet, finger millets, all of these which are indigenous to Africa, and you can see just superiority even in terms of less fat. Then you look at micronutrients and vitamin. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that these are high in fiber, so they are good prebiotics. And as you know, there's this global movement around probiotics. And then, of course, they are gluten-free. So sorghum is notorious because it was used to brew so-called African beer. But we looked at this in our research and thought, what can we make from it? And what we've actually made from, which is what Anne Janet talked about earlier, is a probiotic enriched sorghum drink. So this is actually on the market in South Africa as we speak. And it ticks a lot of boxes. It's gluten-free, it's lactose-free. So it is actually a non-dairy yogurt. And then it's high in energy, high in protein, and has some health attributes, as in, for instance, assists with digestion and is a good support for diabetics because of low glycemic index. So that was a short act. Let's go to Act 2, medicine and herbal pharmaceuticals. This is an interesting story. So it starts in Madagascar with the president of Madagascar saying that Artemisia, and it doesn't say Artemisia annua, it says that they have discovered a product for the treatment of COVID, and it's Artemisia. Of course, it's not really for the treatment because it has not undergone the clinical trials that are useful. And we know that Artemisia annua actually is the product that is used as King Hasu that's what it's called in Chinese medicine, and was discovered then for malaria. Another conversation, there could be something between malaria treatments and COVID, not quite sure, but we need to do some work there. Of course, the WHO then warns that traditional herbs in Africa are being used but cannot be validated for use. And they actually then talk about how this can be supported. Fast forward, 2 weeks ago, we actually had some interesting results. So not only is Madagascar the only country which is saying, hey, we might have something for COVID, but there are lots of other countries. And WHO has actually been facilitating clinical trials in Madagascar, Ghana, Guinea, Nigeria, DR Congo, Burkina Faso, I think even Botswana. So there was a huge meeting last week. What was interesting were the results from Madagascar, which showed efficacy of their product in the treatment of non-severe COVID. And this was actually in patients. And no patient treated progressed into severe form. So there is something there, perhaps early results, but certainly that's something that needs to be given a second look. If you Google these products, you'll find that there are quite a lot of other groups now working on them. But the interesting thing is, because of Artemisia, there was then this big rush to just look around and look at what is Artemisia. And in South Africa, Artemisia afra is actually what commonly grows around here in Lesotho, in the region, actually all the way to Kenya. And one of my good friends, who happens to be my neighbor actually, had a product on the market. So this is a business called Indiza. So they had been middling along, and then COVID hit, and there was a sudden demand for good products, teas from Artemisia afra. And now my good friend has got a really nice business going and getting into major retail shops around here. Actually also sending Artemisia afra around the region. But along with that is a little herb from Zimbabwe and also across the region called Lipia javanica, which is something that I grew up drinking. So it's commonly called Zumbani in these areas, Msuzungwani. And that also just started flying off the shelves. And in fact, it went to an extent where the habitat was denuded and there's been over harvesting of this. But again, it's a product that's now starting to appear in international markets. Now you will ask, is there any validity to the use of these products? We do know that a lot of phytochemicals, including flavonoids, are actually good for dampening down the cytokine storm. So there is some scientific rationale for using herbal teas in this manner. The result then is that tea, and we've known this for a long time, that there is money in tea. But when you look at the results here, what you get is it's mostly, the Chinese teas, but however, going forward, it looks like herbal teas are going to be increasingly important. And when you look at the herbal tea market, you will see here that, well, there aren't any African species of note, really. So here's a big gap for African entrepreneurs and scientists to start pushing African teas. Things like Makoni tea, which is for Georgia, which grows in Zambia and parts of Zimbabwe. The Resurrection Bush, which grows in a lot of Southern African and East African countries. And then we talked about Lipia, which is really something that you get right across the African continent. So there's a huge potential for that. And what Indiza is doing is adding now to their whole portfolio with other teas. So yeah, we need then to be able to connect these African entrepreneurs to markets which are global. And this is really part of what I think these webinars such as this one will be able to do. So in general, with African traditional medicines, there is a need for commercialization and formalization. And commercialization, the way when you study the commercialization and formalization of medicine throughout history, you had the separation of the practitioner from the practice. So in the old days in Europe, you had physicians who were people who also made product, prescribed it, and they made it, and they found that it wasn't efficient, but it also created a lot of subjectivity. And that is where they then separated out the physicians from the surgeons, from the apothecaries, and the apothecaries then became modern day pharmacists. And in a sense, that's actually what we need to do in African traditional medicine, to bring objectivity and also evidence-based practices. Because if you are also prescribing and then dispensing, you can imagine that you do not really have that objectivity that is required. The other thing that this will allow is mass production And of course, that would then make the products cheaper because of economies of scale. And mass production would then require more stable forms of these products, which is what I term pharmaceuticalization. And this is something that we need to move into. And when I work with traditional healers, I usually get to the chase very quickly to say, we need to move from liquid formulations into solid formulations. And then, of course, there is need for regulation of the 3 Ps, as we call them. So the practice itself, the practitioner has to be regulated, trained to a level where they are, they understand and appreciate professional ethics. And then the product, so manufacturing practices and that kind of framework. And then, of course, premises. So we can't just be prescribing things in unhygienic spaces or storing things in spaces that would endanger customers. But, the cornerstone of commercialization is profit. And the interesting thing is that profit is anathema to the African traditional healer. So when you go to consult traditional healers, you do not even give them money in their hands. They ask that that money is left on the ground because they believe that this is a gift for the world. So the money really goes to, if you like, the ancestors, but the ancestors are also not driven by money. So in a sense, it's complicated, but we'll have to get there. So how do we pharmaceuticalize? So, there are lots of things you can do. We need to understand, for instance, for the practitioner then to start history taking and record keeping so that we actually understand what observations they make and what outcomes we are getting. We also need to understand the supply chain, and this is important, especially for protecting the species. And then for what we were talking about, broadening reach and making sure that stable products are actually made. The other thing that we need to do is to understand claims and labeling. I always joke with traditional healers and I say, you make all sorts of claims of the one thing. And of course it's possible. When you look at something like aspirin, aspirin is probably the one pharmaceutical product which has more claims than pretty much anything. But then you need to know how to craft those claims. The other thing is to be able to understand standardization, which we talked about slightly, before this, and then to understand the signs of dosage forms. Because if you're going to encapsulate something or tablet it, there has to be consistent dosing. So traditional healers in Africa will say, drink a cup 3 times a day. But my cup and your cup and their cup, they're totally different. So how do we standardize dosing? Shelf life and expiry, we need to understand that. And then things around purity. So again, that goes to supply chain of the raw materials. So are we getting the correct product? Has it been correctly identified? Is it clean? Does it not have environmental contaminants? Mycotoxins are a big issue because we are in tropical Africa. And then, of course, the ease of use. In African traditional medicine, we like to say that the bitterer or the more bitter a substance is, then the stronger it is and therefore more effective. But that also puts off a lot of patients, especially the younger patients. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, we need to codify these things. And there have been many, many instances in which African traditional medicines have been codified, as you can see here. Many countries in Africa have come up with, these are mostly checklists of products that are being used and how they're being used. However, we need to move to a point where we actually have a pharmacopoeia. And a pharmacopoeia, as you know, is a cookbook. And about 10 years ago, my colleagues in the African Association of Medicinal Plant Standards put out this African Herbal Pharmacopoeia. If you're interested to get a copy of this. I have an electronic copy which I'm free to give. And now we are starting to work on the African Herbal Pharmacopoeia second iteration. We are happy to work with people from all over. We are also happy to get sponsors if there are particular companies that might be interested in, maybe they are working with certain products and are interested in working with that. So would be happy to talk about it without compromising the scientific integrity of the project. Okay, so now last chapter or last act, Act 3, in cannabis in Africa. Is this the new Wild West? And I would like to suggest that yes, it is the new Wild West, because in the West, as you know, that's where fortunes were made. So there are lots of there are probably fortunes that will be made from cannabis, as we have seen from elsewhere in the world, and in Africa probably more than anywhere else, because we have land, we have a long history of using cannabis here, and we have varieties here that you might not get anywhere. You might have seen already Swazi Gold, Malawi Strong, Durban Poison, products from Lesotho. Yes, so from that perspective, there are likely to be fortunes made, but also maybe a lot of hands burnt. And because it's a Wild West, because we are failing to put in place regulations which are human-centered and sensitive. Okay, so to start this act, Africa, as I said, is 1.3 billion. The total addressable market for cannabis is about 64 million. And we are talking here just about the medicinal cannabis aspects. And at the moment, it's worth $7.1 billion. And will be growing by 7%. So you can imagine how big this is. We have presently now 9 countries which have legalized cannabis. And the ones that have already licensed, you see here that Zimbabwe is leading. They have 57 companies that are licensed, followed by Malawi, Lesotho, South Africa. Rwanda is quite new in this. So I think they're actually at the point of licensing, stand to be corrected, and Uganda. But certainly the leader in this is Lesotho. There are a lot of Canadian companies in Lesotho, a lot of fortunes being made in Lesotho. And by the way, a lot of these fortunes, even in Zimbabwe, are being made by tax revenue, as has been seen in the US. So when you look at the number of jobs that have been created in the US, this is 2019, probably more now, because I understand that the cannabis industry was considered essential during the whole COVID shutdown, so it just kept going. And it's interesting to see where the jobs have been created, so agricultural operations. But that's because in the US, it's probably highly mechanized. In Africa, we are labor intensive, so we might actually be able to create a lot more jobs there. Retail operations, I think, has been very successful in the US. We expect that this will also happen here. Now, we need a value chain. And unfortunately, in Africa, we don't tend to approach things from a value chain perspective. And the value chain says there's a cannabis cultivation part, which includes seed, the actual cultivation, production services, and then you have distribution. E-commerce is becoming pretty big. Then you have the processing part, and then you have the consumer products part. And actually, as you go higher along the value chain towards consumer products, that's where you unlock more value. Unfortunately, what I think we are seeing is that a lot of people just want to farm it. On a weekly, monthly basis, there are people contacting me and saying, actually yesterday I had someone contact me and saying they want to understand how the licensing regime works in South Africa. So everybody wants to be in this space, maybe because they think that the barriers to entry are low. However, I tell people that the cannabillions will come from new products, new pharmaceuticals. Uh, we actually don't have testing facilities, so even setting up testing facilities would be a very strategic space to be in. Yeah, so this is the ecosystem then. You have the farmer. Sometimes the farmer is a manufacturer, but sometimes, they are separate. And then you have the markets, consumers, inputs. And at each step of this value chain, there is money to be made, as I've said. Then there are also other things that we should be thinking about. For instance, research and development around the seeds. At the moment, people are just importing seeds from the EU or from the US and planting them into the ground. But it doesn't necessarily mean that those seeds will be stable for THC or CBD and that chemistry. So we need to start thinking about that, sort of local research. Equipment suppliers, again, we seem to be importing things like equipment and machinery, which sometimes we can also start thinking about fabricating locally. Education and training. Right now, I have a group of students who are looking at they're actually reviewing the policies across Africa to try and understand whether these policies are benefiting governments, are they benefiting people. As it turns out, most of these policies are really export oriented. So the African patient, who should also benefit from accessing good quality cannabis, might be left in the lurch. Financing is probably the biggest problem that we have in Africa. So for those of you who are in the US, or maybe actually anywhere in the world, you will know Elon Musk is a South African. And there was an interesting discussion about, would Elon Musk have become the second or first richest man in the world if he had stayed in Africa? And the answer to that is no, because there's no cheap money in Africa. So financing is probably one of the most important things that we should be focusing on to unlock the African herbal industry, and indeed other industries in Africa. Enabling legislation and regulations. At the moment, this is a big legal lacuna. In some countries, they've got it right. In Malawi, they decided to completely set up a trading council rather than trying to regulate products between hemp in agriculture and medicines in medicine regulatory agencies. That is the South African situation. In Malawi, they decided to have an independent agency altogether, which then is integrated, and that might be an interesting learning for other African countries. And then incentives. So all of these are then very, very important for pushing forward the industry, but they're also very important opportunities if one is to enter this industry. So I did a little SWOT here, made it easy for you listeners out there. And what are the strengths? Well, Africa has the strength that it's a huge land mass. A lot of our land is arable. We have sunshine pretty much 364 days, 365 days a year. And that's why it's called weed, because weed loves the sun. We have cheap labor, or let's call it affordable labor. And then a lot of the countries in Africa have experience of tobacco growing, and that expertise is something that they can quite easily move over to this new crop. So what are the opportunities? The opportunities to build an inclusive industry, an industry which does not push out or marginalize smallholder farmers who have suffered under the cannabis laws. just like in the US and anywhere else in the world. And the other issue here is to clearly separate hemp from high THC products. There's also the opportunity of the entry of big pharma. Already the Novartis, Sanofi, and Teva, to name a few, have GW Pharma. They've started getting into this area. So it's an opportunity, but it's also a threat. And at the moment, it's estimated by Prohibition Partners that there are 49 million people currently using medical cannabis, but they don't, in the African continent, that is an unmet need because we don't really have good quality products available out there. The weakness is the legislation. There's a lot of uncertainty. For instance, South Africa, the regulators here had 2 years to try and bring certainty, but it's not quite there yet. Some talk about regulatory lassitude. Maybe conservatives in government are thinking, hey, this is cannabis. Should we let it through? We don't know. Then, of course, issues around capacity in terms of knowledge and expertise, and lack of an integrated approach. So piecemeal, instead of thinking about the value chain. So South Africa, to its credit, has now recently released what they call the master plan for cannabis, and it's very clear about the value chain approach and what support can be given to that. Lack of testing facilities is a huge issue across the region. So this is not just for cannabis, but also for the foods, the teas that we talked about earlier. So that is something that we ought to be looking at. In the university, we are trying to do something, and I'll show you just in a slide or two. The industry is export driven, as I said, so we need to have an industry which also looks after patients at home and abroad. Healthcare workers are really not trained on this. So doctors, pharmacists, we don't have any dispensaries, by the way. And it's something that will be interesting for us to learn from the US. And that issue about financing is also a problem because, for instance, in the UK, they have a law that's called Proceeds of Crime Act. And this is 2002. And 2002 is ancient in the sense that so UK companies cannot very easily invest in initiatives such as these, especially where regulations are unclear about whether it's their criminal liabilities. And then the threats, I think, are a lack of understanding of the industry. A lot of people coming into this industry are just entrepreneurs looking for a quick buck, or so they think, and then they don't really have enough depth or support around them to really think about this industry, well, this as an industry. There's also the confusion between medical and recreational use. So what regulators or policymakers tend to focus on are all the negative things that we have come to know of cannabis in the past 100 years, I guess, since the 1880s, when 1890s, and then the 1920s. There's also the threat of synthetic cannabinoids coming in and displacing the natural ones. And again, if that happens, Africa, which tends to focus a lot on agro-processing and agro-products, might then be disadvantaged. What are we doing? So in the university, we're actually looking at setting up a technology center. So we have partners who are bringing in equipment, and then this will be set up at what we call the innovation hub. So we've got a space there, and we have partners who will be involved in training and also in then taking that innovation into the marketplace. So if I come back here in a year's time, I hope I'll be able to show you some of the things that we would have done. Okay, so I want to now sort of tie everything together, giving you lots of information, but I want to focus on the business opportunities because my chair is really about advancing the industry. So we have other things that we could look at apart from cannabis. So because Africa is arable land, so we are not taking advantage, for instance, of things like growing marigold, which is the source of luteolin, zeaxanthin, the products that are used in macular degeneration. And most of us are, the world is getting old, and our old eyes can do with these kind of supplements, which, as you can see, is worth almost $3 billion, and probably more when you look at sort of the global reach of this. So this is an opportunity. Marigold is a weed around here, but then we need to package it into a way that we start following the whole good agricultural practice, good cropping practices, and then of course the value adding. So in South Africa we talk about something nyana, which means a little bit small, something that I thought I would throw in here, which is Datura stramonium. Again, not African, but grows in Africa. And this, by the way, as you know, is the source of scopolamine, the source of atropine, tiotropium, and tiotropium is pretty big now in COVID. Anything respiratory, really. And for Africa in particular, some of these products have been in short supply because of disrupted global chains. And yet, Datura grows out here in my garden. Datura grows in a lot of gardens across, in fact, in maize fields. So it likes disturbed soil. And this is something that we can look at. There's also a huge market, not just for health, but in defense. So atropine is used there. It's used in agriculture. And the biomass of this could be used in biofuels. So we actually have a little project that we are starting out. I have a PhD student who's now starting to look at this, local datura and trying to extract and purify these alkaloids. And then Madagascar again. I think this will be the last slide by way of case study. And we all know this. Again, this is a weed. I have it in my garden, and yet it's probably one of the most important pieces in our armamentarium against cancer. And there's actually a global shortage of vincristine vinblastin, which comes from this plant. Rezapine is an old antihypertensive product which is still used across Africa, and we import these things. So we can also look at this, where we start to grow this again, and that this grows outside, but try to put it into a value chain. So what are the overall challenges then? So as you know, extinction is a big thing. And there are two types of extinctions we should be worried about. So we should be worried about biological extinction of the plants. And there's a new report. This was a BBC report, actually BBC was reporting on a publication which estimates that up to a third of tropical African plants face extinction. 2 years ago, we put out a scientist warning with some of my colleagues around the world around climate change and how it's going to impact and change the chemistry of a lot of these plants and change the habitat, reduce access to medicinal plants. So that is already beginning to happen, that extinction. The other extinction, which is also worrying, is language extinction. And with language extinction goes out the cultural diversity that I showed you right at the beginning. So if Africans are all going to start speaking the same language, eating the same food, using the same WhatsApp group, as it were, we are going to lose this diversity of knowledge, cultural diversity, and therefore we will lose our diversity around food, the food culture, diversity around traditional medicine culture. So this is very important as we start to bring up our children, the next generation of Africans, wherever in the world they are. They still need to be tied to the motherland. So what needs to be done? Well, overall, we need more market intelligence. There are a lot of things that we don't know. There are a lot of things in Africa that we thumbsuck. And so we need a lot of market intelligence, which obviously will be tied to a lot of research. We need to be building value chains rather than individual elements of products or product offerings. And working with scientists, we need to start thinking about how do we produce pharmaceutical quality out of our products. And then we also need to connect to global industrial value chains. So value chains that, like in the herbal tea industry, for instance, outside of Africa, in the medicinal plant area. And I'm glad that we are already connecting, say, around frankincense and other important African medicinals. Yeah, so that is really the end of my talk, and I would like to say Nkosi, Tatenda in our languages. And we also have a series of webinars that we host every 2 weeks. They are really aimed at the biotech pharmaceutical industry in the broadest sense of the word, food biotech, medicinal products. And you can actually follow us. At the moment, the channel is called COVID Connect Africa because it kind of started in COVID times, and when people were trying to cope with time, with that this time. We've had a lot of cannabis symposia. We've talked about financing agribusiness. More recently, we talked about neglected foods or so-called neglected foods. And then, of course, we focus a lot on local manufacturing. So with that, I would like to thank the organizers, Anjanette, and to thank the audience.
Thank you so much, Professor, for a broad, fascinating discussion. Several people indicated that they would love to receive an ebook of the pharmacopoeia. Can they write to your email address that was just on the screen, or should we direct them somewhere else to get the ebook?
No, they can write to that email address, and then
Okay.
we'll just forward it to them. Yes.
Okay. Professor, would you mind typing your email address into the chat box?
Okay, I will do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or we could bring that slide back up either way.
Yeah, maybe let me bring that one back up.
Okay, we'll put the slide back up.
Slide, yeah. Okay, there we go. Yeah.
So for Hussein and Peter and several others who indicated like to get a copy, please take. Do you have a preference of which email they use? The top.
No, they can just
one?
choose anyone. The bottom one is probably better because it goes to our secretariat. The TUT one tends to be crazy busy, so it'll be a few weeks before I get to them. Yes. Thank you.
Great. So the nano@pharmaconnect.co.za to get your digital free ebook, which is such a gift, of the African Pharmacopoeia. So thank you for making that resource available for the audience. I'm going to be signing up to get my ebook. I think Denzel sent me one already, but I definitely need that link. So we definitely have a few
I'm
questions.
excited that you'll be one of our authors, right? Because you're going to be contributing a monograph or two, so that's exciting.
Yeah, it's such an honor to be included and to have the opportunity to work alongside you, Professor. Your experience and just the broad integration is so refreshing to hear about. And actually, along those lines, Peter had asked early on, how in your process of looking at food or medicinal plants in general, how do you incorporate transdisciplinary into your process when you work with traditional elders, or how are you doing your process?
Okay, so this is interesting. So when I work with traditional healers, a lot of them are actually referred to us through a business incubator. So a lot of them now want to to understand business processes, despite the fact that they are probably some of the savviest business people you can think of, because you're already selling products, and then they will say, "Well, I'm selling products for women's health, but I just want to modernize my product so that the younger women, can access it." So younger women are more likely to buy it in capsule form than they are in a big, big bottle that's dirty liquid. They can't put it into their bags. So that's actually one of the things that we do, where we are just working for people who are already in the field. The other way of incorporating transdisciplinarity is always that with my students, we tend to focus on the products. So it's not research for research sake. I mean, I've done that. I've been there. And I'm saying in the second half of my life, I would really like to be able to put products into the market. And the minute you talk about putting a product in the market, you naturally have to work with many different players.
Yeah. Fascinating. Along the lines around cannabis, Peter had a question around whether or not the EU accepts testing that's done in South Africa, and if not, how can that be improved, and what are the needs specifically for testing in general?
Yes, so if it's EU GMP, so the EU is actually the biggest export market at the moment. So as long as the products meet EU GMP, then they are going in. I think at the moment we have 2 companies which have exported from South Africa into Portugal, and I think more recently into Poland. I think the other countries in Africa are still lagging behind. So part of the issue is always that connecting the dots into the market. So it's easy enough to say I'm going to grow cannabis, but what's the quality that you're starting off with? What's the quality of the seed to start with? What are the processes you're putting in place for you to actually end up with an EU GMP compliant product? So I think those are some of the problems at the moment. And those are some of the issues that we are also trying to assist with. But these are discussions, or if people are interested in having these kind of discussions further, I would be happy to take up here.
Well, and that's a generous offer. So I realize that some of the questions or more information that you would like addressed, that David is offering the use of his email addresses for further engagement with people who've attended the webinar, and that's a very generous offer because you're a busy guy. So this is a great observation. Again, Peter, you really made thanks for being lively in the chat. I always appreciate that. He's really pointing out about combining the cannabis and botany and flora products from Africa, thereby creating unique products from the continent, such as Marigold oil extract combined with CBD for treating glaucoma, for instance.
Okay.
And are you seeing those kind of products being developed, or are you working on anything like that?
No, so we're not seeing those. What I always say, though, when I work with entrepreneurs, right now, I mean, I'm working with some entrepreneurs, and they will maybe combine, or sometimes they have, one product. And I say to them, from an IP perspective, it's not very clever. So you do want to build something which is a little bit more sophisticated, but also, with a scientific basis to it. And then you get the other extreme, right? So you can go on the market in South Africa and get a product with 50 different constituents in it in a little capsule, 400 milligrams. And you're saying, but this makes no sense at all, because the kind of concentration you're going to be able to put into this would not have any therapeutic effects. So I think there's a lot of scope for combining even African ingredients with ingredients from elsewhere in the world, and building really, really good products. Like on the tea side of things as well. Blending of different teas would be great, and that's something that I play around with just for myself. I experiment with myself first before I do anything. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we're just about out of time. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Professor, and taking up some of your precious time in the evening. There are some more questions coming through, and I'll just actually I'll give this last one. Sorry, it just came through. Are there any traditional pharmaceutical companies in Africa? It's a great question to close on. Are there any?
So we are beginning to see some, but they're not big. I have a group of students also looking at companies and trying to see, their export readiness, for instance. What we tend to get a lot of is sort of associations and maybe small social enterprises that are looking at, but mostly they are looking at exporting of raw materials. So we have an organization called SIOPA, which is Southern African Essential Oils Forum or something like that, and they bring together a lot of small groups in the essential and fixed oil business, but they just don't get scale. And yeah.
Yeah, and the conversation about financing could be a whole webinar on itself. And as you said, being one of the biggest limiting factors, Africa certainly has the capacity, the resources, and everything to have these kind of companies, and that really we're looking at issues around financing. And so thank you for pointing out what one of the major challenges facing more development in this industry. And I look forward to seeing how your students absolutely master this, right? And those are some lucky students to have you as a professor. I'd love to take one of your classes. And so please,
I should invite you actually.
Oh, yes, yeah. Please. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. They don't think, they think I'm really tough, but I'm tough for them, so that's
Good professor. Well, you're getting them ready for the challenges that we're facing. And thank you for outlining those in terms of the challenges across the board, not only in financing, but also ecologically and culturally. It's very refreshing to see a presentation that brings together these important components of medicinal and aromatic plants and also food crops. So thank you so much. Please follow up with Professor Katerere if you have questions, or there was a couple requests for collaboration with you. So please follow up and email him, and of course email us at Research Aromatica if there's anything we could do to assist in the educational sphere. And enjoy the rest of your day or evening, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Carlo, and thank you to everybody who has attended.